interaction between all of us people interested in atmospheric chemistry in India, and also for us to showcase some of the latest research that is happening over here. So as a part of that, today we have Dr. Yogesh Tiwari from IITM, who's going to be talking about greenhouse gases. Before he starts off, I'll just give a very short introduction to Yogesh. Yogesh Tiwari, he is at present employed in the same institute as I am, which is the Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology. He's employed as the scientist E position over here. We are a part of the Ministry of Earth Sciences. Yogesh is essentially in charge of doing most of the greenhouse gas work that we are doing in our institute, and has actually been extremely active in making observations and understanding the carbon cycle over India for several years. His research career basically started as while doing his master's degree, which was in geophysics and meteorology from BHU in Varanasi. After which he went on to do his PhD at the Max Planck Institute of Biogeochemistry in Jena, Germany. He's before that he was obviously doing his BSc, etc. And since then he has essentially traveled a little bit more. He was a visiting associate in NOAA Boulder also, and has been employed in IITM for a fairly long time. He has published more than 62 research papers in multiple national and international journals, and is a member of the Scientific Steering Committee of IG3IS, which is a part of WMO Geneva, Switzerland. He's a nominated expert member in the UNFCCC report review committee also, and is a lead author in the was a lead author in the IPCC report of 2019 on GHG guidelines and refinement. He's obviously contributed to several other reports focused on climate change, including the MoES climate change report that came out recently, and is a reviewer for many journals, and has also reviewed several PhD theses in India and abroad. He is an external faculty at the Pune University, and also at Andhra University and BHU, and has guided many PhD students, postdocs, master students, etc. He's also won several awards, including the Best Employee Award of 2022 and the Certificate of Merit in 2022, and is actually playing a very important role in setting up good monitoring stations, which are of a world-class quality across India. And in fact, very recently, he was traveling to Bhopal, setting up the new atmospheric research test bed over there. So with that introduction, I'll let Yogesh take over. Yogesh, can you please share your
Yeah,
screen and give us your talk?
yeah,
I'll give you a reminder 5 minutes before the end so that we can have long enough session for discussions after that.
yeah.
Sorry, Yogesh, just before you start off, the other members who are attending the talk, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box, or later on you can also unmute yourself, and we'll have a proper discussion session after that. Until then, please keep your mics muted. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anup, for giving a nice introduction. So, this talk is basically about the entire research outlook and overview of greenhouse gases monitoring carbon cycle research in India. What we have started almost say 15, 16 years back at IITM. Also, what is going on within the country. So the topic I chose is urbanization and the carbon cycle, because both are very interlinked, that urbanization is increasing, and then we are very much worried about the biosphere and these things. So what is the capabilities that we have? What are the basically the instruments, or what are the modeling capabilities we have currently we are doing for the carbon cycle research? Before I start, I would like to give credit to my previous student like Santanu, Ravi, and then currently Smriti, Srinivas, and also our senior colleague Vinu Valsala. Apart from this, many master students who have really done PhD and postdocs with us, and then they have contributed in this journey. So I would like to start with just a very simple schematic, just to give you a brief about what is the carbon transport in urban areas. So you can see in the cities, basically there is a cement factories are there, fossil fuel CO2 is there, which really goes in the atmosphere. and then there is a forest fire right side you can see, and then there is a sink mechanism, that is a GPP through photosynthesis, and then respiration. This is the natural cycle. And also there is the cattle population, ruminants, and then many other things are then also from the rivers we are exporting carbon to the ocean and these things. So this is a standard carbon cycle in cities, in urban areas you can say, which is basically there. This is sector-wise GHG emission in India from 1994 to 2006. This is from the Government of India. This number is already submitted as a BUR3, Biennial Update Report 3, to the INFCCC. You can see that how our energy demand is increasing. The blue bar is basically the energy. So from 1994 to till now, the many-fold it is increased. And the agriculture is almost constant, the emission is almost constant, and there is a little increase in land use, land cover, and forestry. So the major chunk of the emissions basically come from the energy sector. Energy sector is basically the electricity, the fossil fuel, and whatever the emission sources are there. So under that, as I am telling you that electricity production basically takes almost 40% of GHG emission by categories in India into 2016. This is India's BUR3 submitted in INFCCC. And then comes the road transport, and then enteric fermentation, and then so many other parameters are there. But these two, electricity production and then road transport, are the big emission sources, at least over the India, and this is set by the government. Now, what are the consequences? So one more picture, if you see, this is power generation sources in India. This is issued by the Ministry of Power, Government of India. You can see this is breakdown of power generation capacity covered by the database. The total corresponds to this watt as on 31st March 2005. You can see that the total 55% of energy were produced by the coal, and rest were hydro, nuclear, oil, naphtha, and these things. But after 31st March 2022, this 55% increased to 70%. It means we are now more dependent on coal because this is cheaper source, and then we need more power for our development, for our factories, and then for our various other things. Where it is reduced, you can clearly see that hydro from 26% gone to 16%. All other are very small, but these two play a major role. It means this area is playing a big role, and then you can see that electricity basically playing a big role in emission of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So here picture clears, and this data is given by the government. Now, what may be the feedback mechanism for this? So there are the emissions, and then concentration of CO2 and methane, and etc. There will be a heating effect, climate forcing, climate change, and then temperature increases, rain, sea level, everything affects, and then impact basically flooding, food supply, and etc. Just one plot I wanted to show you. This is IITM study that the number of cyclones are increasing in Arabian Sea. So we cannot say clearly that this is due to greenhouse gases, but yes, this is the changing climate, because earlier you can see the cyclone in the Arabian Sea where basically almost 80% increase. So and then Bay of Bengal, there is a number of cyclones, but now it is really getting equal. So between 82 to 2000 and 2001 to 2009, you can see the number of cyclones, they are increasing. This is basically the due to changing climate. Also, there is an intensity of cyclone increasing. There is a rapid intensification of cyclones. So basically what is happening? So extremely high temperature characteristics of marine heat wave riding on a global warming background supercharge these cyclones. Basically, you can see that how basically cyclone Nisarga and cyclone Amphan, what happened to this one. So these are basically interlinked. There are feedbacks and these things. So what exactly we need? We need a comprehensive research in imperative to understand GHG emissions variability and its impact in India. So we need a better observation and modeling capabilities. Now I'll give you some flavor what exactly research we have done in India in this field. So this is GHG surface monitoring sites in India. This is multi-institutional approach. So almost this much observations are currently available in India. This is in situ concentration and flux measurement both. The red marks are IITM sites. These include
Congratulations.
the concentration flux. So
I'm sorry, Yogesh, once again. AH, can you please mute yourself? Or the admin, can you please mute AH? Thank you.
yeah, so the red dots are IITM observational sites in central India, and there these locations are there. And then then NRSC Hyderabad has black. They are including of all ecosystem flux and GHG concentration. Likewise, many other organizations have. So currently, the total we have a 13 sites for GHG concentration and 9 sites for ecosystem flux estimations. Those is current scenarios in India. So what exactly we need? We need a CO2 methane concentration observation at the surface sites and flux estimation using inverse models in India. So this we need because whatever data we are generating, that data has to be utilized in the model, and then we need to understand the carbon cycle over India, because what ministry is giving the numbers that we are basically producing a lot of carbon in the atmosphere, the industries are increasing, but whether our observations shows similar kind of thing, and how we can reduce the uncertainty in the model these things. So now I will start the journey basically from 2009. I am showing those where the IITM studies mostly involved or we have really done. So in 2009, the first paper related to carbon dioxide, these trace gases and CO2 isotope records from K Prama India, it was there, where K Prama, Seychelles, and then MLO, it is Monolova, were compared CO2, delta 13C of CO2, and then 18O of CO2. And then basically K Prama as a coastal site, this is very nice compared with the Seychelles and MLO data, and then shown a very strong, these are black dots, these are black line is observations. This data was available for the inversion and these things. And then another paper we have written in 2011 about the same thing, but we have taken now the modeling efforts, and then with the observation and 3 models, we have tried to understand what is basically the seasonality of carbon dioxide in India, because it was just nascent phase when we started our research about the greenhouse gases during those time. So when then it came that now our models are getting little matured, and then we have taken 3 global models, TM3, LMDZ, and ACTM, and then we have tried to understand the seasonality. And then this is very interesting plot. This is basically a root mean square difference between observation and model. You can see during the monsoon time, the model and observations difference is basically very less, almost close to 1 point something. And then during winter times, it is high. This shows clearly that during monsoon time, why models are able to capture the carbon dioxide. This is clearly seen that because generally at the Cape Rama, the wind comes from the Arabian Sea, and then is more clear and pristine than the winds which comes from during winter time from the continent. It means the real signal which is not captured by the models, but they have captured the pristine environment, basically the meteorology. And then one more paper was there in 2013 by a group in Bangalore, where they have used the Hanle data. Hanle is basically a very high altitude monitoring stations just in northern India, where they use the Hanle data and they try to do inverse modeling, and then just try to understand what are basically the fluxes using this model. So not only Halle but many other observations were gone in this, and they have tried to understand how the uncertainty reduction are there in that data, and uncertainty were then the data, and then how this posterior fluxes were basically estimated. We started at Pune our CO2 and methane concentration observations in sometime in 2009, and then we have found that The carbon dioxide concentration is like a global background. It is basically the increasing last few years. 2019 we have seen little gradual decrease, but anyway it was increasing. Now methane is basically showing kind of fluctuations, increase and decrease, these things. So we have found that the trend of methane is 5 ppb per year, and then trend of CO2 is 2.7 ppm per year over India. We have started few high temporal resolution monitoring at Pune, where we are monitoring atmospheric CO2 and methane at very high, almost every 1 second interval. You can see this is the Pune data, and it is currently going on. We started almost end of 15, early 2016, and then data is going on. So there we can see a clear trend in methane as well as in carbon dioxide. Now, these data we have used in the models, in the inverse model, just to understand how basically models perform when we just simulate this data, and then when we use this data to understand the carbon cycle. So this is very first paper. It was written during the last PhD of my student, when we have used observation as well as the satellites. So what are the benefits of satellite and newly proposed atmospheric CO2 observation network over India in constraining the regional fluxes? So what we have found that the value addition of Indian station Srinagar is clearer when we separate India from rest of the temperature ratio. Is basically we have taken transcom kind of inversion thing. So and then the maximum uncertainty reduction achieved by Srinagar is 30% during the January to March and September December. It means these data sets have a power. They can reduce the uncertainty of the model, and then they can really show the observations. Then we have published one very interesting paper, and then we wanted to quantify the enhancement in atmospheric CO2 background due to Indian biospheric fluxes and then fossil fuel emissions. So what we have found, what we have used basically a global tracer transport model and regional fluxes, and we show that the enhancement of atmospheric CO2 due to India's biospheric fluxes and fossil fuel emissions spread over a large extent over India and surrounding region. So this we have found basically the enhancement due to biospheric fluxes is about minus 2.6 to 1.4. Minus means it is a sink, and then means it is a uptake, and then 1.4 it's basically it's a source. It means biosphere also acts as a source sometime due to biosphere biomass burning and these things. And also the fossil fuel we have found almost 1.8 and these things. So this was basically quantification how the Indian fluxes are quantifying to the global background. Then we have done a very nice study. This was very eye-catching to the ministry, and then we have shown that the atmospheric observations show accurate reporting and little growth in India's methane emissions. What we have done, we have taken observation including from Srinagar, Cape Rama, and then few other observations available, and then we have put in the model, and then we have estimated India's methane emission close to 22 teragram per year during 2000 almost 2010 to 2015. And then this black line is from the Ministry of Environment and Forest. So we have shown that what ministry estimates using the bottom-up modeling, we have estimated similar from the top-down modeling. And then we have shown that the EDGAR emission inventory, this orange line, is basically 30% higher than what a government estimates, and then this is based on our observations. So the observation has the power which basically utilized in the inverse model and shown that yes, whatever the India's methane emission, and then interestingly the total growth here, the paper says that little growth. So the total growth basically we have found that it was almost 0.2 teragram per year during 2010 to 15. However, the EDGAR growth was 0.7 teragram during 10 to 12, only 2 years. So it was basically far way below from what EDGAR proposed. It means the EDGAR emission inventories basically they were estimated using the various activities data in India. They have they should be relooked. Then we have published basically a country scale analysis of methane emissions with a high resolution inverse modeling using GOSAT and surface observation. Here we use the satellite, and surface observation again we have used the Senegal. And then again we have compared with the government's BUR on, that is biennial update report 2 and biennial update report 3. And then basically we have shown that the 1 and 2 numbers are close to our numbers, and Edgar is again, it's overestimating the numbers which we have. So 2 times we have shown that we are closer to the government numbers what government proposes. And then the same model is basically validated with the observations, the vertical aircraft observation which we have done at the IITM. This is observation, and then this is optimized flux. As you can see, both are very much comparable. Then recently we have published one paper that regional estimation of methane emission over peninsular India using atmospheric inverse modeling. Here we have used a very high resolution model, the flux part, and then we have used the 3 observations, Sinagar, and then Gadenki, and then here Tumba, and then we have inverted the fluxes, and we have shown that the posterior fluxes, basically this is our inversions, is higher during the monsoon time. This is for 2 years, and then pre-monsoon, and then post-monsoon gradually this time. So it shows that the methane emission is high during the monsoon time because of various natural and anthropogenic activities. And then we have used Senegal observation in one more study. This was CO2 and methane and CO2 over Southeast Asia using zoomed chemistry transport model, LMDZ. So we have used 2 kind of transport models. One was zoomed, and then one was basically high coarser resolution, almost 2.5 to 1.27, and another was 0.6. So we have seen that how the models are basically comparable in case of these observations. This is Senegal observation, and then 2 different models. Basically the red one is a zoomed model, and then the blue one is the coarser model. In case of methane, there was a difference. The zoomed one was more closer to the observations, and then in case of CO2, it was not much difference was there. And then in one more study, we have just checked the intensification of atmospheric CO2 concentration due to the surface temperature extremes in India. This was really a very interesting study where we have utilized 2 surface sites, one at in the northern plains over the Indo-Gangetic plain in Barkacha, and then one is in Pichavaram in the south. And then we have just estimated, we have compared with the NE, net ecosystem exchange, and then with the air temperature, at these 2 sites. So what we have found that at particular threshold, when the temperature crosses goes in the heat wave condition, like more than 42, 43 degrees centigrade, and then persist. So we have found that the carbon dioxide is basically 2 to 3 ppm during the heat wave conditions over India. So it shows that if we have a more heat waves in India, it means we have a 2 to 3 ppm extra carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We have published one more paper. We are trying to understand the diurnal and seasonal variability of CO2 and methane concentrations in a semi-urban environment in Western India. Basically, we have used the Senegal data, and we have tried to understand the diurnal variations of carbon dioxide and methane with the planetary boundary layer, and as well as the seasonality of the methane, how the seasonality of methane and CO2 looks like. Then we had one more study, which was basically atmospheric CO2 source and sink patterns over the India region. We have taken various data sets, and then we have tried to understand what are basically sources and sink pattern, and then we have taken actually carbon tracker data 2010, so where we have taken terrestrial ecosystem fluxes show decreasing trend for most of the regions. This implies that the forest cover is increasing, which is consistent with the India State Forest Report. So we have supported the government forest report where we have shown that yes, forest is increasing. And then we have had one more study where we try to understand basically what controls the methane seasonal variability over India in the vertical atmosphere. So this is with the altitude, the carbon dioxide, the methane variation with the altitude during two different seasons. So this is basically over the Arabian Sea and over the Indian subcontinent during the monsoon and then winter months. So basically during southwest monsoon, the air with comparatively lower methane concentration from southern hemisphere reduces the methane over India by almost 18-14 ppb, and then the contribution of local fluxes to this seasonality appears to be a weak as the synthesized methane fluxes from Edgar dataset of the Indian Peninsula itself show a peak in the summer and then dip in winter. And one more study we understood the atmospheric methane sub-seasonal variability over India, where we have taken the active and break cases, and then we have understood how the methane basically moves, the methane signal moves from the surface to the upper troposphere. So the strength of this is active condition, this is the break condition, this is the surface, and this is middle troposphere, upper troposphere. In case of break, this is upper, middle, and then surface. And then we have taken three different model simulations: LMDZ, ACTM, and CAM simulation. And then where it is clearly shows that the strength of methane ISO, intraseasonal oscillation anomalies, this is anomaly basically, methane anomalies are stronger at surface for active case. So you can see that at the surface active case it is stronger. However, in the break case, it is stronger in upper troposphere. It was kind of a seesaw structure in almost all the model it was showing. It was really very interesting piece of information. So there is a clear northward propagation of methane anomalies. You can see at the amplitude of almost plus minus 10 ppb and at a speed of approximately 1.5 degree latitude. And then after everything, so we feel that we need more and more observations. And then one more study we have published, that we have designed a surface CO2 monitoring network to constrain the Indian land fluxes. This kind of paper was really necessary just to make surface observation installations. So what we have done, the optimal network design for ground-based monitoring of atmospheric CO2 over India to better constrain the Indian terrestrial surface fluxes. And then it was proposed, it was basically this network was done or designed using the FlexPart Lagrangian particle dispersion model FlexPart and Bayesian inversion flux. And this studies show that the base network of existing stations, means the stations which are existing like this, the hatch boxes you can see, these are the existing stations. The existing stations over India could reduce the uncertainty of Indian terrestrial surface flux in an inversion framework at this resolution by more than 30% during the post-monsoon and winter season, and by more than 15% during the other parts of region. Addition, 5 new stations to the base network could reduce the uncertainty by additional 15% for the seasons reaching up to 45. It means if we just as per our study, if we go for more observations stations, we can reduce the uncertainty of the estimations by 45%, from 30 to 45%. So this was really very important thing. Additionally, we had one more project that was CO2 flux observation at different ecosystem over India. That is basically IITM MetFlux project, where there are various observation stations over Darjeeling and then over Pichavaram, Kaziranga National Park, Polar Bear, and Andaman Island. And then carbon sequestration at Kaziranga National Park occurred during the pre-monsoon season, and the atmosphere biosphere carbon transfer processes weakened during the monsoon and then reversed during the winter. But the major highlight is the Kaziranga National Park acted as a net carbon source in 2016, but a moderate sink in 2018. It was really very interesting to see that how forest ecosystem acting as a net carbon source. And then if we see closely, we have found that due to the flooding during that year, and then due to the cloudy conditions, the GPP is basically was a weak. And due to the various other emission sources were there from the ground, from the soil, from the bacteria, and these things, which net acted as a source. So if we see basically from the top, from the satellite, or if we see the NDVI, it looks very green, but acted as a source. and but another year in 2018 it acted as 6. So unless we have observations, we cannot really understand whether it is acting as a source or sink. This is flux monitoring at different ecosystems from different groups in India over the Betul, and then this was over the Ganga basin, and then this was near the Hyderabad, then Kaziranga, Sundarbans, Pichavaram. So you can see how during different seasons the CO2 carbon sink is basically varying at different ecosystems. So this kind of study is really necessary to understand what is India's lung performing, how is basically the sink is happening in different ecosystems. This is very recent study published just last month, and then where we together developed a very high resolution any net ecosystem exchange over India using a VPRM simulation. So this VPRM basically a standard code, but in this case it was really the code was written from scratch, and then we used observations just to validate the model. So we have used the three observation locations. One is Kosi Katarmal, you can see here, and another is Haldwani, and third one is Kaziranga National Park. And we have compared NEE net ecosystem exchange observation and with the model simulation. You can see there are differences over this area. For example, Kosi Katarmal in after the October time, and then over the Haldwani there are differences from January to June, and then Kaziranga National Park differences are there. So basically this kind of differences, if you go in the observation, we check the respiration. So what model shows the higher sink than the observations, because this could be that model is not able to capture the proper respiration. That's why it is showing this kind of signature. So this kind of development is really very much necessary just to understand the processes and then this thing involved. Now GHG observation by aircraft over India, we have done few projects for aircraft. So this we have done 14, 15, 18 at few locations, Varanasi, and then over Kolhapur, and then over the Maharashtra area, and then we have used Kaipex aircraft campaign, and then we have put the GHG observation in that. There are some very interesting results came. This is methane monitoring using aircraft, which is basically compared with the CAMCAM model. And then you can see over the Ganga basin when we have done, over the Mahabaleshwar, over the Kolhapur, and this kind of structure you can see the aircraft methane over Ganga basin. It is high basically, and then at the upper atmosphere almost 6-7 kilometers low. And then models also show similar kind of structure, but there are differences between model and observations. But if you see this here over the Kolhapur Solapur area, it looks almost flat. This is monsoon time, almost July 2015. And you can see during monsoon time our entire structure is not very much difference for the methane, and model also shows similar kind of structure. So such data has a very power just to understand the model vertical transport, also just to estimate the fluxes in the boundary layer and these things. So this paper is still we are writing for this, and this is carbon monoxide, same time methane and carbon monoxide we have taken with the observations. And then we have done a very peculiar kind of study, and we have used carbon monoxide just to understand, see the clean and polluted clouds, detecting using CO measurement via airplane. Actually, this idea was given by Dr. Tara. Actually, she has made this plot. I forgot to put her name here. So when we use carbon monoxide and then we see the relative humidity, water, and then cloud droplet concentration, you can see this is the different colors are altitude. So dark color are higher altitude, and then light color are lower altitude. So whenever carbon monoxide is high at darker color, suppose here over this area, say more than 80 ppb and these things, and then very high, it means we have a polluted cloud over here. Polluted cloud means carbon monoxide was very high within the cloud, and at the same height at other locations it was unpolluted clouds. At the lower levels the pollution was there. And then over the Ganga basin in September 2015, I think it's the same, and then we have utilized similar kind of just checking how the clouds are polluted or not. There are other IITM observational developments. IITM projects are there. Recently, we have started measuring delta 13C 18017O of in the atmosphere of the air. This is high temporal resolution monitoring instruments. These three components are very important to understand, particularly 17O, 18O, because they give information about the atmosphere biosphere exchange. So if we study the isotopic ratio, for example, 17 or 18 ratio, then in that case, the higher isotopes are basically taken by the biosphere during the photosynthesis process, and then the lighter isotopes are basically evaporated. So if we see during day and time, during respiration and photosynthesis different season, we can really try to understand how the biosphere and atmosphere interact with each other in terms of photosynthesis and then respiration processes. Also, this will be useful just to understand the carbon water nexus in the atmosphere. This is my yeah, this is the recent development what Anup was mentioning. Just this is last week, just 10 days back, we have installed a 72-meter tall tower at atmospheric research test bed in central India, near Bhopal. It's almost 55 to 60 kilometer outside Bhopal. There is a village called Silkheda where atmospheric research test bed has set up by the IITM and in the 100-acre land, where 72-meter tower is installed, and then you can see the suite of instruments we have. It's multi-component weather sensors we have installed at 7 levels. You can see installation is already done, and we have a net radiometer at two levels, and then we have infrared thermometer. We have a CO2, CH4, CO, S2O concentration, that GHG concentration at 3 levels. Basically, we have done 12 meter, 36, and 72 meter. We have isotope, then we have a CO2 flux measurement, and then we have a photosynthetic active radiation, and then we have a soil moisture, temperature, soil. So almost we are covering from soil to atmosphere everything. This is the lab setup you can see, and then this is the main gate, the facility it is there, and this is tower. This picture is taken from the top of the tower. This is basically the lightning sensor, and this is the aviation light. So this lab was set up by different teams, and then from IITM, I would like to mention from our group member G. Srinivas. He has done a tremendous job, and then he has really set up this site nicely, and then nicely the observations are coming. So hope we'll have very soon all this kind of observation directly, and we are making sure that we are hooking the internet over here so that we can take real-time data at the IITM, so that we can really check the data on real-time basis. So the my take-home message is Indian observation site Srinagar suggests an overall source of temperate erosion terrestrial fluxes at a magnitude of 0.19 petagram carbon per year, as opposed to minus 0.23 when none of the Indian stations are considered. So there was a huge uncertainty. The value addition of Indian station is clear when we separate India from rest of Eurasia, and then the maximum uncertainty achievable by Srinagar is 30% during January to March, and flux monitoring site and Kaziranga National Park act as a net source in 16 and moderate sink in 16. So this kind of research is done when we have observations, more and more observations, and then better modeling capabilities, and then it is basically helpful to the policymakers, to the government, to the ministry. They are giving report to the INFCCC, and then they are preparing India's emission reports and these things. So this is all from my side. Thank you very much. If any questions.
Thank you, Yogesh. That was a wonderful talk and shows the incredible amount of work that you have been doing over the last couple of decades. There is a rich data set, but obviously several questions which are still to be answered, but for which, of course, these monitoring stations need to be developed and increased. Yogesh, there are a few questions. Let me start off with something that you mentioned and has
Yeah,
pretty
I
large
can,
implications.
yeah, I can see on chat. Yeah, let me
Yeah.
see.
But
Yeah,
we'll go through that later. But I want to start off with
sure.
a comment that you made and has been supported by your study and has very large implications, which is essentially saying that the EDGAR emission inventory, which is basically what supports all global modeling activities, is flawed over India and is over-reporting the emissions. So this obviously has pretty large implications in terms of policy. Do you have an idea as to why it is getting things wrong? Is there a particular sector which is being overrepresented in EDGAR as compared to reality?
Yeah, what my wide guess is when Edgar is taking basically the data from India, they are not considering, uh, could be they are considering overestimating those places where there is no emissions. So basically, if they are taking data from the cities, they are taking data from non-urban areas and these things. So they are their bottom-up estimations are considering all areas as a single common kind of source. So this could be one reason that they are overestimating. So, but when we are working with the observations from the top down, so which is basically based on our truth, and then it says that no, the emissions is basically not that much. So my guess is Edgar estimations are based on a wrong area, or they are overestimating at particular area where emission is not there. That is my wild guess. Yeah.
Yes. However, for methane, do you think it is agricultural emissions that they are overestimating, or any idea why? Which sector it could be that is being overestimated in terms of?
Yeah, well, when we have estimated the emissions, our large portion of emission from the rice and then ruminants, and of course the wetlands emissions were there, but wetlands have a large uncertainty over India because the inventories are not very clear, but rice and ruminants information available. So basically Edgar has a larger difference at these two sectors, rice and ruminants, where we have found that the emissions are less.
Right. But this brings me to the follow-up point that LMDZ, the model runs that you showed, they seem to be doing well in terms of methane. How is it possible if they are still powered by the Edgar emissions? Why are they getting it things right?
Yeah, well, you are right because the way they are using Edgar, probably for the fossil fuel part, they are using Edgar, and then for the wetlands, they are using something different, and then rice something different. So in that case, I assume that somewhere because I have while writing our second paper, we have found that some emission inventories which goes to the model still they do not have much clearer message, or they have a larger uncertainties, so that those uncertainties really reflect in the final estimations. And then we have found that such kind of estimations sometime shows that yes, model is overestimated, model is underestimated, and these things. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to read out a couple of questions. If anybody wants to speak, please raise your hand so we can allow you to speak. The first question on the chat window is from Subrata Mukherjee, and he's asking how a single station like Sinhagad can act as a representative of average fluxes of these long-lived greenhouse gases like CO2 and methane over
Very
India. What are the criteria for selecting a representative station? And I think one of your studies already identifies that using a model, but can you please
yeah.
comment on this?
I think it's a very good question, Subrata. This is the question from very basic minds that how only one station can constrain the fluxes. So what we have done, we have taken a Transcom framework. Transcom, which is a transport model community framework, and then where we take not only the India, but we take entire global observation network from NOAA, from various organizations, which is available freely on public domain. So what has happened previously that when you do not use Indian stations, then your model has some uncertainty, maybe something like uncertainty is 50% or 60% something. When you add Indian stations, then again you do a similar kind of inversion and estimate the fluxes, then your uncertainty is reduced. It means if you subtract it, then you can see the power of adding the Indian stations. So that way we use the Indian station, a single station, and then estimate it. But you are right that using one station is not sufficient unless we have a very dedicated kind of network, a very well planned network which can go to the model, and then this uncertainty of the model we can reduce, and then the faith on the estimations, faith on the data, the sources and sync what we estimated, it really increases. Yeah.
Another comment by Dr. Krishnan is talking about the interannual variability of carbon fluxes over Kaziranga. Sorry, KNP. Is that
Yeah, Kaziranga.
Kanpur?
Yeah, KNP
Kaziranga,
Kaziranga.
right? Yeah. Example 2016 as compared to 2018. He says
Yeah.
this is interesting. Can you please comment on this and what could be
Yeah.
driving the interannual variability?
Yeah, basically, we have checked it. This internal variability is driven by the local condition, by the flooding, and then by the extra emissions which happened during that time. So, if we separate the data, actually, we have done some basic studies. We have taken those days which has the extreme rainfall and then flooding condition, and which did not have. So we have just tried to understand what happened to the respiration and then what happened to the photosynthesis activities during that time. So we have found that the photosynthesis is basically reduced. I mean, the uptake is basically reduced when there was a flooding condition. It means the root was flooded completely and there was the extra emission from the ground. So even there was a greening, but the uptake was very much low. So this really contributed the internal availability of that location during that year. Yeah.
Great. I think Professor Devra has his hand up. So Devra sir, if you want, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah. So good afternoon, sir.
Uh, Good afternoon, very good afternoon. No doubt it is an very excellent talk, and then he covered many aspects. But I have two, three questions where I could not understand probably. So one is it is the two constituents what you have been talking throughout your talk, the CO2 and then methane. They are very, very important constituents. In fact, for our global warming problem, methane is very much contributing as well as CO2. Of course, we all have been reading from the literature that one after the other they are contributing a lot of warming to the atmosphere. There is no doubt. So you have focused much on CO2 and methane, CH4. And then my point is, you showed in one of your slides that the model and observations are very much journey is going together when during the monsoon. What about the other seasons? Why they are differing? Why model is not capturing? Our observations are wrong. I have two two things I wanted to ask you. That is number one, and then number two is see, by increasing the network, you say all along that observations are not sufficient. I wanted to increase my network. Okay, you are all right. You are rightly said. But increasing network, that means what I guess you are trying to see natural things. Where are the natural things? But my point is, apart from searching for the natural things, are you trying to mitigate these emissions by any way? See, network increasing, there is no surety that you will get the complete answer to your question. But you see, you have to simultaneously search for mitigation processes. That is number three. And then one more thing, Sinhagad. Of course, I also study some of the things for Sinhagad. But you see, Sinhagad being pristine station, high altitude station, your CO2 and the methane content, whatever you are observing, they are all from the transport, not local. Can you identify how much is the transport from transport you are observing? How much is the local source? Is it possible to have such estimation over like any high altitude station also? Because this is transboundary and then trajectory analysis. So many things are available nowadays to estimate the local as well as from the faraway place transport.
Yeah.
These are some of my clarifications I want from you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. First of all, for joining this talk. And those who do not know, first of all, Dr. Devara does not require any introduction or anything. He is IITM senior scientist who retired from IITM. And in fact, I was his first student. I started my research career with Dr. Devara in IITM. So I have learned a lot from him. So thank you, sir. Thank you for coming here. So for your first question, that why models agree well during the monsoon time. So basically the models are simulated, they run using the two basic information. One is the meteorology and one is the fluxes. Basically we give a boundary condition to the models. So in case of Cape Rama, in case of Srinagar, because they are basically located in the coastal area, in the western coastal area, where is the seasonal reversal of wind pattern is there. So it means during the monsoon time we have a more cleaner signal than during the winter time. Winter time we have a lot of activity which is captured by the sites, and then monsoon time we have a very coherence kind of signal. In one paper we have shown that basically we have shown the scatter plot where the signals are not jumping during the monsoon time, and then winter time it is jumping. Why model capture monsoon time? Because models really captures the meteorology, it does not capture the basically the signal. Yeah. And then when model has to capture the signal during the winter time, it fails, because that is the real test of the model during the winter time. That's why we have installed this new site at Central India in Bhopal. All year round we'll have the continental signature. Then this data will have a power just to basically validate the model, utilized in the model, and then see and then visually improve the model so that improve our fluxes, so that model better capture those observations, and then those model can be utilized to understand the sources and sink. And regarding your natural sink, during that time when we increase the number of sites in India, so basically if we see the inverse modeling frame, basically this is the entire mathematics, and then if you see if we have a less number of observations over India, say a layman can ask, why don't you just survive just one observation in India, just put it one, and then that's sufficient because CO2 is well mixed in the atmosphere, and then that can represent. But if we talk about the regional representations or sub-regional representation, in that case it will not be sufficient putting just one site. If we have a multiple sites at some strategic locations, what we have just shown in one of paper, in that case we have found that we capture basically the regional and sub-regional signals, and then entire the framework, the inversion framework, has the uncertainty reduction larger if you have a more number of observations in that. If you have a less number of observation, it means it has larger uncertainty in that. So that's the reason. And regarding your natural sink and then mitigation processes, yes, I exactly agree with you that same time when we are doing this kind of research, that we should go for the mitigation and natural processes also, because see, lot of mitigation things are going, like for example the solar energy, the wind power, and this are going on just to reduce the energy budget over there. Because see, India is growing, it's almost largest growing economy in South Asia, so it requires a lot of energy to sustain the industry and these things. So we have to go for some kind of alternatives, and then I think government is doing a lot on that. And the same time, but we have to put our research based on observation and modeling, so that tomorrow if India has basically taken a target that why during 2070 it will go for net zero, but how to verify it? We cannot depend upon the external researchers to verify us. We should have our own setup. So that's why we need a more observation and accurate modeling, so that we can verify, and same time we'll have this natural sink process. And regarding the Srinagar, you ask that Srinagar is basically, we have found this all these years. We have done a weekly sampling and then the monitoring at IITM campus. But recently, last year, we have installed a very high resolution monitoring instrument that every 1 second is measuring. So basically Srinagar site, in case of GHG, we could not understand it clearly, because how the boundary layer is playing a role, how boundary layer is breaking there. And because see, mountain is really sometimes it becomes a very critical, because you don't know when you are really measuring your boundary layer is exactly parallel to your site, then you'll have your signal will be very large, so your representation is very low. If boundary layer goes down, then you are on the top, then your representation is very large. Our boundary layers goes up, something like that. So this thing we can understand if we have a day and night observations over that location, just to understand that. And regarding the characterizing the sources, Yes, we are planning to put some isotopic instrument over there so that we can do the source apportionment, and also we are going to put some more instrument, for example, the short-lived gases also, so that we can really try to understand what kind of sources are really dominated over that site, so that we can understand the site. And Sinagad is basically India's another station after the Cape Rama and Hanle, which has the longest data. We started 2009. It is continuing almost more than a decade data. It's really fantastic data, and you have seen many research has done, many papers have written, but still we have to do lot at Sinagan. And I, sir, agree with you that still we have to understand that side. And then our observation started last year, and hope next few years will have us a better result than previously.
Thank you so much for nice explanation.
Thank you.
And then of course, I was more, am more happy that you are putting more efforts to understand stations like Sinagad. Sinagad is not the only station, high altitude and then pristine. So similar stations are there. Such stations are always stand as a reference when you compare, when you do the observations versus model comparison. These stations are very important. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Yogesh, there are a couple of people who have asked about the measurement technique. How do you measure CO2 within clouds? And
Within
wouldn't you
cloud.
get some, inside clouds? And wouldn't you get like a moisture effect on the instrumentation? Because that's a big issue,
Yeah, I
right?
think this is a very interesting question. So we had a very nice time when we are measuring this carbon dioxide, methane, carbon monoxide, and water vapor within the cloud. So what we have done, so we have used first of all the reverse inlet. Suppose this is the aircraft body. So our inlet is looking down. So aircraft is throwing like this. Our inlet is looking behind. So the chances of going, say, water inside our tube is less, the inlet is less. If it goes in case, so this tube goes in some kind of a cavity where this water can be condensed and accumulated, and then the output goes to the instrument, so that we have a clear separation of water. If it is it accumulates in some cavity and does not go to the instrument. And we got a chance because basically this was done during the Kypex measurement, and Kypex idea was just entering in the cloud. It's like, oh, we are looking the cloud, just go to enter, because we wanted to measure the cloud. And we got a chance just to measure the GHG within the cloud, and then we have found this. We have not published this. It is really interesting. I don't know how much it makes sense just to say that polluted cloud, non-polluted cloud, based on only carbon monoxide, because there are many other components are there, aerosols are there, many things are there. So, but this is just a very preliminary based on carbon monoxide, because they have a lifetime of 2 months. They can just go away again, they can come back. So it depends. So whenever that time we were doing, we found this number and we said that it is polluted clouds.
There's a question about heat waves. You showed that there was a definite increase in terms of your greenhouse gas emissions during heat waves. Do you have any idea of the process which drives it, and what is the major process which will drive it?
This is really very interesting because basically, just you understand in nature what happens if there is a biosphere. Biosphere takes your CO2 from the atmosphere. So if you see the micro scale, the stomata will open CO2, water, and then your radiation goes, and then it will make its food, glucose, and these things. Now you understand. Suppose your atmospheric temperature increases and it goes beyond 42, 43, 44 what North India goes. So what will happen? Suppose stomata opens and then it faces this high temperature. There are always chances of evaporating its own water. So the leaf will evaporate its own water at that high temperature. So what happens when there is a high temperature? The plant does not open the stomata. They just keep closing the stomata. This depends upon the type of plant. Suppose there are desert plants, there are many other plants which are on 50 degrees centigrade and these things, but they are completely different kind of nature. So generally the plants which we see that at heat wave condition, they do not open the stomata, they wait for the temperature to come at optimum level. If they open the stomata, they will just lose their water. The evaporation will happen. That's why you see that in heat wave condition, the smaller plant, the sapling, they die. The bigger plant, they survive because they have enough food that time just to survive there. So I mean, these plants are very smart. They just make a food only when there is optimum temperature in the atmosphere. So we have found that we have estimated that in one heat wave, the 2 to 3 ppm of carbon dioxide stays in the atmosphere. If stomata doesn't open, it means that the CO2 remains in the atmosphere. And then if in one heat wave we talk about in one single year 2 to 3 ppm remains. So as per climatic study, if you have more number of heat waves in future, so we are going to put 2 to 3 ppm extra in the atmosphere due to heat wave, and that is a large number because 2 to 3 ppm is basically a growth rate, the annual growth rate. So that's why it's kind of a feedback. If we have a high amount of CO2, if you have a high temperature, then we have a high chances of CO2 stay in the atmosphere. So this is the reason of heat wave and then biospheric. That's why we are started measuring delta 18 or 17. Or we wanted to understand during the heat wave what is happening during these isotopes, whether heavier isotopes are kept and lighter one evaporated, how they react during the heat wave conditions. So those kind of observations really will help us just to understand the carbon-water nexus, how is basically carbon and water is basically exchanging from in the atmosphere.
Great. There are a couple of questions about the emissions of Edgar and what are driving it, but I think you've already answered those, so we'll not go into that. There is one question that was there about your methane concentrations, which seem to show increasing trends at certain points and then decreasing trends at certain points. Why is there such a sinusoidal
we have checked this even with the global observations also and various, and then we have found that globally this kind of structure was seen globally after 2007 or something. There were methane decrease started because some actions were taken globally, through many mitigations were taken. So global methane started decreasing that time because of those mitigations, but all of a sudden it started increasing again because of more heat. You need a more energy, more heat, and these things. Methane is required basically for various other kind of industrial processes and these things. So in the atmosphere, in the well-mixed atmosphere, in the larger area, you can see even globally also again methane started increasing. So this kind of sinusoidal is seen in the global observation also, not only us.
Yeah, so you're saying it's not local sources and sinks which
No, no,
drive
no,
it. This is a global phenomena.
not local sources. No, we have checked it. Yeah.
Okay, we are almost out of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you the same question I'm going to ask every single speaker on this forum, which is first, because there are quite a few young researchers on this forum, what are the major gaps that the future community needs to focus on, according to you, within your topic, of course?
Yeah, so the major gap area immediately challenge what we are looking basically is to have accurate observations and basically the accurate modeling, because this is my emphasis. Suppose you have the instrument and you are doing the observation, but how do you know that this is the accuracy? This is what you are measuring, what exactly is in the atmosphere. So that part is required. So just to understand the observation, just to understand the modeling, it's always requires to understand the various processes in the atmosphere. So this is the major gap areas what I see currently, that we have very less observations in India. I showed you 24, 23 sites, but do you know that those sites are, I mean, I don't want to reveal that. I mean, observations are not shared and these things, those things are there. Let us not talk about that. So in that case, if we have a less number of observations, that we will not be able to understand the future carbon cycle. We will not be able to understand whether we are going towards the sink, whether we are going towards the source, and then we will not able to help the policymakers that whether India is becoming sink or source. And then I can tell that there is recently one development happened, that US started the methane pledge in last COP meeting. And they just deviated from the CO2. They said that no, let us talk about the methane, because methane has a higher global warming potential than CO2, and then it can change the climate faster than the CO2. So let us talk about the methane. Why? Because India and China are the highest methane emitters, and India cannot compromise with the rice with the rice emissions. So major methane comes from the rice. So government has a worry because India have not signed this methane pledge. Almost 100 and more than 120 countries are already signed. Because see, we do not have that much mature observation just to say that yes, we have this much amount of methane sink, and we can show that yes, we have this much methane sink. So just to fight with those international forces or international resolutions, we need more and more better observation, accurate observation. Even I got a phone call from Ministry of Environment Forest. They saying that can you show that India has a larger methane sink? I said we cannot tell unless we have a tools. We should have more observations. We should have accurate modeling and these things. So these are the major challenges, major gaps. We have started GHG observation or carbon cycle last 15 years, but what I feel that we are still at nascent phase. We are still at learning phase. We are not even at least at medium level also. So we are getting enormous support from IITM, from Director IITM, from Ministry of Earth Sciences. We are getting very good instruments. We are getting very good facilities. So I am hoping that next coming at least in 5 to 6 years, we have much mature results and then mature science, so that we can reply, yes, this is the emissions or this is the sink, which is basically derived from the observation and from the model side.
Wonderful. Now, the second question is, if as you said, the supporting gods decide to give you 100 crores, what will you do with it immediately?
Yeah, well, see, I got I got this opportunity in previously also, but COVID has derailed everything. So basically, first of all, if I get money, I will take the basically academic organization to come ahead to the students and to the future generations, just to get aware about the climate change, and to start to come in the in this field, like to the research of climate change and these things, to start the monitoring, to start the modeling and these things, and to have more observations, and then just get aware to our those future generation that how climate change is changing and how your actions will change to the climate. So and then work more on mitigations.
Fair enough. There is a very quick question, and I think that's related to what you were saying about observation networks. What is the role that satellites can play in terms of getting observations? Are we only worried about ground-based observations, or can we start looking into the future?
Well, satellites has a they are very powerful tool because they can look at those areas where we cannot reach. But satellites have limitations over India, because monsoon time, when there is a cloud, satellite cannot look in the ground. So in our recent studies where we have used the GOSAT, we have used the OCO2, we have found that during monsoon time, even monthly scale, we get only few pixels over India, and then we have a large gap and data set. So unless satellites has like better cloud screening capacity, or they just penetrate the cloud and then they can measure the greenhouse gases, satellite data cannot replace the surface observation at all, unless those kind of technology has come. I am not sure in future, but currently no. Whatever satellites are available like OCO2, GOSAT, no, they cannot adequate during the monsoon time over India. We need a surface observations just to complete this gap.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and also a very important point saying all satellites need good validation also, right?
Yes,
And that's possible
exactly.
only by making ground-based or
Exactly,
in situ
exactly,
observations.
exactly. Because this validation process, if you see, we have a TCON network, Total Carbon Observatory. This is entire globe, but not even over the South Asia. So these satellites, even we are using the carbon dioxide, but they are not validated over the India. So if we are validating with the surface observation, we are doing the apple to banana validation. So unless we have a better kind of equipment like FTIR, these things we are measuring like total carbon, then only we can validate those satellites. So there are challenges for validation for during the monsoon and these things. So these things are there.
Great. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we are out of time. If anybody wants to get in touch with Yogesh, please send him an email. I'm sure he'll be very happy to answer any more questions that you have. With that, Yogesh, thank you so much for giving the talk. It was really informative and very impressive to see all the work that you're doing. And hopefully, the future will take us in the directions that you have told us about
Thank
today.
you. Thank you, Anup. And then I would like to really give my thank and heartful thank to Dr. Devara and then our director who really joined this, what I can see, and then he asked the question, and also all the young audience who really joined and then they try to understand. So basically, the my message is just to act like a climate friendly and then act like a more towards the carbon neutral and these things so that we can go ahead in the future. Yeah.
That's great. Before we disperse, can I please ask all the participants to put on your video camera so we can take a picture for our records?
Yeah, please,
Just for
please.
like a second or so, if you can,
Yeah.
please put on your video cameras. Uh, okay, I
Thank
can
you.
see plenty of smiling faces, which is great. Excellent. Padmakar, if you're there, can you also take a couple of pictures just in case? Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for
Thank
attending.
you.
We'll
Thank you.
announce our next talk soon, and hopefully, we'll see you all again very soon on that one.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
very much.
Thank you,
Thank
Yogesh.
you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.